I've always been confused with the Necromancer because you are killing things and then summoning them back to life as undead minions to serve you.
Are we the baddies?
But if you are playing as a Necromancer in Diablo 4, this is my class guide and leveling bone build to get you through the game. So let's go. Let me know in the comments if you're playing as a Necromancer and what build you're running. So we'll start with a general overview of the Necromancer because these class guides are mostly to get you familiar with the class, give you a build so that you can sort of get used to how to play in Diablo 4. So the Necromancer is a weird sort of amalgamation of different archetypes. Now, the key thing that you'll know with the Necromancer is obviously the summoner aspects with the minions that you do have that you'll start out with. Now, you don't have to use the minions. You can sort of play as sort of a ranged caster or even in some sort of a close quarters combat with sort of like a Reaper or something. There's a lot of flexibility with how the Necromancer chooses to play. Because of that though, they can often be a little bit of a easy class to get yourself familiar with because of the minions and sort of get yourself success, but they can be a tough class to master because of the complexity and how you could choose to play them, whether you're using the minions or sacrificing them or the different ways you could use them and the different builds. So for this build, I was originally tinkering with running minions as like the main focus, but I played around with Blight as like my main damage dealer, but I felt that just with like the damage over time and the shadow damage of it, I was sort of doing nothing as I was waiting for the minions to defeat the enemies. So I ended up switching that out and running a bone build with the minions, and then that felt a little bit nicer and I liked the burst damage from bone. So then I ended up just like going fully into the burst damage potential of bone, and there is a lot of potential there, especially once you get into applying vulnerability to increase the overall damage that the enemies take, and then sacrificing some of your minions to further increase your vulnerability damage. You can really do a heap of damage just with vulnerability and these bone skills. But then you also get a little bit of that Necromancer uniqueness by having the Iron Golem in this build, which fits in because of his ability to deal that vulnerability damage as well. But let's talk about attributes. So attributes are one of the most important things for your gear to look at when you are choosing your pieces. For the Necromancer, intelligence is your primary stat. This increases your skill damage as well as your resistance to all elements, but that skill damage is the priority. Secondarily, if you're looking for some other stats, willpower isn't too bad because it increases your resource generation, and your resource here is essence. And maybe also in line with willpower is dexterity for critical hit chance as well as dodge chance. But primarily you're really looking for intelligence as your main aspect because of the skill damage. So the build that we're using here is focused on the bone skills. For your basic skill, we're using bone splinters, which will fire out 3 bone splinters. Now, the closer you are to the target, you will hit the 3 splinters on the target. So you sort of want to be in that range. We're also using bone spear as the primary damage dealer. So bone spear will not only add vulnerability with supernatural bone spear, but it's also like your main burst damage is the way that you're applying damage to targets. I would also be picking up unliving energy to increase your maximum essence, and imperfectly balanced to increase the damage of your core skills, but they also increase the essence cost. Bone prison is probably a core skill that we will use. Now, you can get legendary aspects, like for example, the build that I have at the moment, I'm using bone prism to spawn a pool of blight that deals extra damage over time, but you don't necessarily need that skill. But the main thing with bone prison here is that you will trap enemies inside the prison to stop them from reaching you, so you can get a little bit of a distance, but you'll also apply vulnerability by the ghastly bone prison, so you're applying that vulnerability to the target as well to increase the overall damage that they do take. Now, once you have trapped an enemy with bone prison, by adding Iron Maiden on that same cursed area, you'll inflict them with damage over time. Iron Maiden can also increase the amount of essence you have by enhanced Iron Maiden, which makes it essentially like a free skill. So you can use Bone Prism, trap the enemies, use Iron Maiden to trigger to deal damage over time, and then it will increase your overall essence so that you can spam Bone Spear, that main burst damage, onto them. I would also grab Death's Embrace, and then moving down into the next tree, there is a set of bone skills passives that you can pick up here. As you get further in the game, you'll invest more points into these, but you don't necessarily need them other than the 1 to 3, just so you've got that base skill, and also sort of a memory so you know to invest in these as you get further, like is you're leveling up. The ultimate for this build is Bone Storm. A swirling storm of bone appears around you and your golem, dealing X amount of damage over time. This is a huge damage dealing ability, plus the damage reduction you get for investing in Prime Bone Storm, as well as the crit chance gets from Supreme Bone Storm. Your last key passive should be Ossified Essence. Your bone skills deal 1% increased damage for each point of essence you have above 50 upon cast. So it just gives you additional damage. Now, with your class specialization, you unlock a class specialization as the Necromancer at level 25. The quest which will unlock the golems, which is what we're using here as our last skill, is the golem. For the golem, I'm using the Iron Golem with the vulnerability, so when you activate it, it will slam on the ground, which will trigger vulnerable on all of the targets. For the skeletal warriors and skeletal mages, I'm sacrificing them. For the skirmishers, I'm sacrificing them for an increased critical chance, and for the mages, I'm sacrificing them to deal an extra 15% damage to vulnerable targets. So vulnerability already gives you 20%, plus that gives me an extra 15, and then as you invest into standalone and then into Memento Mori, because we're sacrificing them, that number increases as you invest more points into that passive to increase the overall damage you do on vulnerable targets. For your gear and gems, we'll start with gems. Now, in your weapon, you really want to put emeralds to increase your critical strike damage on vulnerable targets. If you don't have any emeralds, topaz is good for just your basic skill damage. In your armor, I'm happy with sort of either emeralds for thorns or rubies for maximum life. And in jewelry, it doesn't really matter that much, but skulls or diamonds are sort of fine to put into here. Now, for your gear, in terms of especially legendary aspects, there isn't too much to worry about as you're leveling because this build functions without it. Though I would grab splintering aspects, so bone spears, primary attack makes enemies hit beyond the first vulnerable for 1.5 seconds. And you could also pick up some of the bone prism skills like the aspect of the burning bones or the aspect of plunging darkness. Though I think the good thing about this build is that they sort of function without needing specific legendary aspects. But as you do get them, and if you do these dungeons to unlock the aspects, you can definitely invest in them, but don't invest too heavily as you're sort of leveling up, because you don't want to waste all of those resources when you're just going to replace that gear. Anyway, some final tips for the Necromancer. They're a really interesting class in that you can sort of equip a ton of different types of weapons, whether that be two-handed weapons or swords or daggers or wands or focuses or shields. It doesn't overly matter too much. It seems a little complex, but I wouldn't worry heaps about it. I personally like either having like a scythe or a sword or something in my primary hand, even a wand, and then a focus in the second hand for the different aspects of the passives that you can get on them. I personally prefer that, but it doesn't matter too much. If you're looking for to be a little bit more tanky, then run a shield, or say if you're running a melee build, then you probably run sort of a two-handed sword. But for this sort of bone specific build, it doesn't overly matter that much as long as you're getting the amount of damage increase you get from those, and, you know, focusing on certain passives that give you either a damage increase or vulnerable damage increase is sort of the main things that I would sort of focus on in terms of that gear progression. The downside with like the minions, and even though we're only using the golem here, but the downside with the minions is that they kind of just do their own thing because you can't control exactly where they go. You can control the golem a little bit by actually casting its ability to trigger as active effect. It will go and sort of attack in that general area that you pointed it to, but otherwise they just kind of run around and attack on their own, which is a good and a bad thing. So if you're sort of worried about that and, you know, you want to get them, I try and get the golem like stuck in between my prison, so it's like trapped in there with enemies. But for the most part, you know, as long as they're actually attacking someone and targeting something that's similar to you, you should be okay. But trapping it in the prison with enemies makes it so much easier to actually get it to attack the thing you want rather than sort of running around and doing its own thing. But that is all for the Necromancer, guys. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments below. Thank you guys for watching this video till the end. Thank you to our members for supporting the channel. My name is Norza, and I hope you have a great day.